I am fairly certain that at some point over the past few years, you've heard Donald Trump and his whole political thing be described as a cult, probably casually. But what if we took that seriously? What if we took him as the leader of a cult seriously and analyzed the behavior of his followers, tried to figure out what might be coming from in the future seriously? Well, we're gonna try to do that, and we're lucky to be joined once again on the show after a far too long gap by cognitive neuroscientist as well as head of the Road to Omega Substack, Bobby Azarian. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. You wrote an article recently about this, about Trump as cult leader, the Trump thing as a cult, that was fascinating. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that I wanted to talk to you about it. So tell me a little bit about the impetus of it.
Well, to understand the cult-like aspect of it, we really have to talk about a theory from social psychology known as terror management theory. So what the theory says is that we're largely driven by our fear of death. So at some point in the evolutionary development of our species, we became smart enough to become aware that someday we're going to die and probably be forgotten. And that causes existential terror. And to deal with that paralyzing terror, we invented cultural worldviews. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about religions, political ideologies, and national identities. And what cultural worldviews do is ease our fear of death by giving us a belief system that makes sense of reality, that makes us feel permanent. The theory says that religion gives us a path to immortality through a belief in the afterlife, while political ideologies and national identities give us a path to what's called symbolic immortality. So the idea is that ideologies make us feel like we're part of something larger than oneself that's going to outlive the individual. So if that's true, it predicts that when there's existential threat, anything that's like threatening your existence or your way of life, that we cling more strongly to our cultural worldviews. So we become more ideological and we become more tribalistic. So more aggressive towards people that aren't in our group, and less critical and less willing to speak out against potentially problematic elements in our own group. And so when you have a situation like a pandemic, where it's just looming existential threat on levels that we've never seen, then everybody becomes more ideological. And when one side is becoming more ideologically extreme, then it creates fear in the other side. And you get this positive feedback loop where the nation just becomes increasingly divided. So it is a cult in the sense that there's a shared belief, and I would call it a cult because with QAnon and Trump, a lot of it's not attached to reality.
Okay, well, I would certainly agree with you there. So that's fascinating. But one thing I want to dig into is you talk about these existential fears of death. Of course, during the pandemic, they're like less theoretical. Like we're seeing people die, and so that's what really interests me. Obviously, the Trump cult predates the pandemic by multiple years, but it survived the pandemic, if not enough to usher him back into a second term. So my question is, the clinging to an identity when you feel afraid makes sense to me. I can understand that, and I get that people can be irrational, but they were very much turning against seemingly anything that would save their life, or at least what the scientists say would save their life. So if it is a fear of death, why were they so willing to turn to the people who seem to be increasing the odds that they die in a very real way?
Yeah, great question. And this is like one of these paradoxes. And I see people writing articles. I think The Atlantic had an article that said something like, America no longer cares about the greater good. But when we think that, it's just kind of fundamental misunderstanding of like what these people believe and what they're about. In their mind, they are the good guys. And to really understand why, we would have to kind of go deep into these conspiracies. But when they don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, when they don't trust vaccines and think, maybe this is all like part of some plan by the Illuminati or it's a bioweapon. That's kind of the mindset they have. So they don't see vaccines as like being a thing that's going to save their life. A lot of them are scared to death of like injecting them with something that, they don't know what the results will be. So we really have to try to, I was going to say empathize, but there's a word from cognitive psychology that's similar. It's called mentalizing. So empathizing means, people associate that with kind of feeling sorry for these people. And they say, I may not, I don't feel like empathizing. They're doing damage to me and my family and friends. But mentalizing just means kind of like understanding their beliefs and goals
Sure.
and their mindset. So they really have a whole different set of beliefs. And if we want to reach these people, we got to get to the root of it. And it's nothing like our belief system. It's quite different. So if we don't understand that at the beginning, there's really no hope for bringing us together. And I think we need to do that, because if we don't, there's going to be right-wing terror. There might even be some sort of, violent response to that from the left. We could see the nation splitting into two. There was an article that came out the other day that said most Trump supporters and almost half of Biden supporters thought that the red states should secede. And if we do that, we really have two different groups, two different ideologies, two different social organisms. If you look at society as a sort of organism, and they're going to be in conflict unless we align interests. So we don't have to agree with everything these people say. We don't have to even meet them in the middle, but we do have to try to understand them just the same way we might try to understand any sort of cult member. They're pawns in a game. They're being brainwashed by these people at the top. So really, we need to understand how to get them away from those people with truth.
Okay, so my inclination sometimes is to try to persuade, to write misinformation. But I wonder, based on what you're saying about this existential threat and how it might be stronger during a pandemic, these are basically behaviors and thoughts that are attached to changing circumstances. The beliefs might not be attached to reality, but it sounds like they are afraid because of things that are real. They feel uncertain, they feel at risk, at threat, that they might die. So at the end of the day, is this less about correcting misinformation or convincing them that Trump is a con man? Is it more about fundamentally changing their life circumstances, improving the quality of their life, giving them less reason to feel afraid of, military invasion, pandemics, economic harm, those sorts of things?
Sure, if there's a way to do that, yeah, that really gets at the root of the problem. So it's very psychological. It's not a lot of people just go this route where we try to convince them based on facts when they don't believe that they're facts. I mean, trying to reach them with logic. But yeah, it has to go deeper than that. We have to really understand why these people are hurting, why they're so vulnerable to people like Trump, who just come in and tell them this story that scares them and then pretends to be the person that's going to save them from everything. So we got to go a lot deeper. We also got to show them that we're listening to them, because when we do say things like, why aren't they doing things that would help their life? We got to understand that they have a completely different story. And a lot of it is that they just think that we're not listening. I know they had that, it's like a non-player character. They were just basically saying people are sheep. So that's kind of interesting, because they think they're the woke ones. And the QAnon movement is kind of the woke movement of the right. A lot of these people think that they're doing something righteous. So yeah, it has to be deeper than the current approach. There has to be this massive campaign to restore trust. One thing we could do is we could admit when we make mistakes. So when the CDC told us not to wear masks for so long, they need to come out and say, that was a mistake, because that's what separates us from them. Their problem is their leaders never admit when they're wrong. So even though doing that ourselves might not cause them to do that, we're still establishing ourselves as the adults in the room, and we're showing we're willing to listen to everyone. We're not just part of this war where like it's us versus them.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.